So we've got two guest speakers, which and then a general discussion on the theme of well-being in schools, whether anybody actually cares and why we should care, and then the formal business of the AGM. Our two speakers, we've got Dr. James Lane, who is, I believe, an executive head teacher of two primary schools in Haringey, and Antoinette Bramble, who is Deputy Mayor and Cabinet Member for Children and Children's Services in London Borough of Hackney. Antoinette, James spoke at our recent conference and very, what's the word? Thought-provoking on well-being in schools, and particularly well-being in the new Ofsted framework. Antoinette, I've heard you speak previously, and I think you've spoken at CASE as well. And I know that you've done some work around children's happiness in schools. So, and, it'd be interesting to hear that about all your work from the local authority perspective.
But it's not.
I'm going to ask. Okay. So shall we start with you, Antoinette, please? If you've got about 10 or 15 minutes, and then James, and then we'll go to a general discussion.
Thank you so much. We speak a lot about mental health and well-being. I think the most interesting thing to me is that you don't hear that a lot in relation to children and young people. It's always around adults, and actually we need to start talking about mental health and well-being long before we become adults. I think as well we need to move from this perception about mental health and well-being of being at the acute end where someone needs medication, therapy, treatment, or sometimes be hospitalized. Just checking in about your mental health and well-being should be a normal, natural part of our working day, our lives, and with our families. And giving an understanding to children and young people that your mental well-being is it's like a mental checkup. In the same way you'd have a physical checkup with your body. We take vitamins, we have exercise, we think about what we eat and what we do to take care of our physical bodies. That should be the same regime we take towards our mental health and well-being, and normalise talking around mental health and well-being. And so it's not something that children and young people feel that is scary or worrying. It's widely recognised within education and mental health sector that children and young people's well-being is a huge impact on their ability to learn, achieve and thrive. I'm sure I'm in a room of virtual educators, currently educators or used to be educators, and we know that the children that are happiest are the children that thrive the best. You can remove barriers, learning abilities, any disabilities, race, background, ethnicity, class, remove all of that. The children that are happiest thrive the most. So why that isn't intrinsic in everything that we do around children and young people really needs to be looked at. Mental health problems can impact children's ability and academic achievements. It could be a reason as well why many of us have those children that just attendance avoidance, that don't want to go to school. And sometimes it's because of the experience that they have in school has an impact. So there's things that we can do to offset that. One of the things that we done in Hackney was a sense of belonging. So I set up something called Hackney School Group Board, and it was a board that I set up. Well, originally it was in a response to forced academisation by then the Tory government, so that schools had an umbrella, something to kind of be part of if they didn't want to go through that forced academisation process. So it was a kind of, look, government, we are doing this. It's not that we're ignoring your policy, but this is a stopgap. Well, it was ignoring the policy, but, we just didn't think forced academisation wasn't the right thing to do with schools, but we needed a response, right? You have to kind of tell government why what you think is better than what they think. And we won that battle, because now forced academisation isn't such a thing. So I'm glad we didn't go that route. But what I did is I established that board to do that. And they were there to lift up standards in education and making sure that we were world class. And for us to be world class, we had to do two things: improve our exclusion rates, make sure they would reduce, but also make sure we had a big focus on mental health and well-being. So the board did a sense of belonging. We got someone to do a piece of work with us, and we spoke to different schools to find out, what do you do for children to get a sense of belonging? And we heard children's voices. And from that piece of work, we heard about children, how they felt attached to their school, their communities, their friends. They spoke about learning. But the most important thing that came out through that sense of belongings is children having identity of place. So even before you thought about education, it was their sense of place. Is this school my place, and do I belong there? And then out of that, the happiness, the positivity flowed. So making schools more than an institution where we put children in as an input and an output, that they come out with these brilliant results. And as a previous teacher, Senko, assistant TA, as a TA, of course, all those things are important. But actually, it's how we ensure that when people think of school, they think of it as a healthy, happy, secure place where children are going to be happy and thrive. So we did that piece of belonging, which really, really helped. One of the things that we do is, like, post-pandemic, we looked at our education strategy. And one of the things that I said to my education director, I have a new director now who is brilliant. I said, the focus really has to be on well-being. Now, I don't know about you as pre-educators. I'm really going to date myself and make myself old in this virtual meeting. But I taught pre-pandemic. Right. So that shows you how long that I've not been in the classroom. And I'm acutely aware of what I experience as a teacher is very different to what a teacher now will experience in the classroom because of the pandemic. And actually, that did something to our mental health and well-being that never happened before in British society. And that we spoke about it a lot, but we still weren't addressing it a lot. So I'm really pleased that the pandemic brought health and well-being to the forefront of our mind, but we didn't address it in the way that we should. But one of the things that we set up in Hackney is well-being and mental health in schools in Hackney. So all of our schools have a mental health and well-being health hub, for want of a better word, in school. We call it WAMS, which stands for Wellbeing and Mental Health in Schools. And it's an integrated program between health and education. And we established it back in about 2017, but then we had to revisit pandemic and post-pandemic. And it back then it was innovative, it was ambitious, and it was approached to prioritise resourcing in the whole school and provide a unique bridge between the health and the education sector. So what we wanted to do is normalise education and well-being for our children in the same space, making sure that people understand the two are entwined, and actually without it, you don't get the best for all children. Because one thing that I would say is that the thing about Hackney, we are joint first in the country for our SATs results. We are second in the country for nationally for improving outcomes for most disadvantaged children. Our children on HSC plans are doing better than any other child in any other borough nationally. But I always say, now I'm like a proud parent, I'm beaming. Every academic lever in Hackney, we are above the national average or we are outperforming our peers. But I always say, at what cost? Because actually those high results in itself, why they sound great, if children are not happy in the midst of that, or stripped of their identity, it's come at a cost. And we never want good academic results to be a result of children's health and well-being. So the WAMS program was set up to work with schools to develop an environment that supported mental health and well-being and reduce the need for interventions. So there were clear indications and signs that actually, if we did something in the school culture that had an environment and ethos of well-being, you'll see less interventions around mental health and well-being. To increase capacity within schools to meet the health and well-being need of all pupils, and identify early where support is needed for individuals. For far too long, children are only coming up and being identified when their issues become acute. And actually, sometimes some children will always need intensive and quite detailed support, but sometimes children's needs are not met, so it becomes exacerbated. So sometimes they need heavier or more intrusive intervention because their need was met. So that was a really important thing for us, to support personal and social environment development for all children in schools, and for schools to increase inclusive practice. So I spoke a bit more about exclusions, and it's not just permanent exclusions, it's about internal exclusions as well. What is the impact of a child or a young person when they have done something wrong? And I used to be assistant head teacher. I've talked about education background. I'm not against consequences. There are always consequences for actions, but does that action have to disrupt their whole learning? And does that consequence have to impact their mental wealth and health well-being? Well, no, it doesn't. So we've created something now in Hackney called HEALS, which is Hackney Education Additional Learning Services. Basically, it's our alternative provision, and schools can come along there, children and staff, team teach, work out interventions, work with parents, and it's a way to give that child that support. And the aim is for them to go back to mainstream school. And it isn't kind of like that kind of one-way street where a child goes into alternative provision, never to be seen again. It's really around supporting schools. It's picking up where children are at risk of exclusion and working with them. We also are in the process of building a framework with our voluntary sector. Now, our voluntary sector, so those of you that have a council or local authority background know that as much as you are visible in the community and out in the community, there's that issue of trust. So the voluntary sector often know when a child is at risk or a young person is at risk before you do. So we're building a framework where we can use the voluntary sector and pay them to go in and do the work with school. Chair, how long have I got? I didn't check the time.
Another 5 minutes.
Okay, great, thank you. We also using the WAMS programme to promote cohesive and cooperative links of schools working with our mental health services. So mental health services are there on site, and they can work with children and family immediately, not to deliver programmes of work, but to make recommendations and make sure the right provision is put in place, and to support parents engaging with schools and other partners, which is key. Schools are very, very busy places, as you will know, and actually anything that we can do to ensure that they are signposting and facilitating that work will be good. And actually, I welcome the Labour government and them talking about mental health and wellbeing in schools. And that will build on the work that we are doing here in Hackney. We have CAMS workers in schools that give on-hand advice to practitioners straight away. We have mental health teams in school, which focuses more on targeted intervention, facilitating early intervention and signposting. So the CAMS worker there is to do that high-level strategic work so they can get and see more children and families. And then the mental health team in schools, they do that. There's a health practitioner that is part of that as well, that works within the setting. And I mentioned our special pupil referral unit, they link up with that. All of these things, I would say, is that we've done it to normalise you talking about well-being, instead of it being quite taboo. And I know, especially in some cultures, we don't like to talk about well-being. I also think as a British society, we don't feel as confident as we think talking about mental health and well-being. So this is a way to make sure that well-being is part of the education way of life, rather than something that we bolt on or children have access to when they are in acute need. Thank you so much for listening.
Okay, thank you for that, Antoinette. Could I just very briefly, I was going to go over to James, but you mentioned WAMS and you mentioned HEALS and so on. Are they projects or are they fully funded in the long term?
So they are fully funded. The HEALS Alternative Learning Service, that is free. We're offering it free to all schools. We've contemplated whether we should give it free to academies, and me and my director have gone back and forth, but it's on the premise, because they are academies are DFE schools, but they are our children. So there are some services we offer all schools free. So yeah, it's fully funded. The wellbeing and mental health in schools is fully funded, and so is HEALS.
Only that sometimes these things are great ideas that then are limited to a project and then go away again.
No, so we started it back in 2017 and it's still running today. So it's a way of life and expectations within our school community.
Thank you. Right. Thank you for that. And then So from the local authority, the kind of system perspective, back to James, please. And what's it like in schools?
Thanks, John. Actually, and Antoinette, thank you very much. It's when you do these talks, you sometimes wonder if you're going to dovetail with the other speakers, and you've really dovetailed well there. Looking at more, and I am going to be much more school-based, school leader focused, school teacher focused. But all of that, I think, impacts on our young people as well, because I remember doing a survey of our young people a few years ago in our year six classes. What is the thing that worries them the most? And this is considering the challenges young people have in their lives. It was SATs tests that worried them the most in their lives. And I just thought that's something we're doing to them as school staff. Now, obviously, these well-being issues get passed down and circulate through schools. But there's a real challenge there, isn't there, around making sure that school staff are well looked after. So I will pick up on some of the systemic stuff, but thank you, Antoinette, for that. John, may I share slides? Is that
Yeah, of
okay?
course. Have you not got the facility there?
I have.
Yeah.
I'm just going to do it now, but I was just
Sure.
checking with you before I. There you go. You should be able to see my slides.
Yeah, we have.
Excellent.
Hmm.
Yeah, and coming to the point, like the problem often is, and I've got a quote there about well-being. I think the problem with well-being is, and Antoinette's quite right, we talk about it a lot, but we don't know what it means. And I'm going to try and really delve deeply into what well-being means and to diminish this idea of well-being is about constant happiness and the pursuit of constant happiness in a workplace, because that's just something we need to talk about and be really clear with. So I'm going to start with the provocative claim that everything you probably think you know about well-being and happiness is wrong. And I've just got a quote there, which I just want to pick up on. It's about workplace fulfillment. I want to redefine well-being in a sense and start to talk about workplace fulfillment, because we talk about the best run schools, schools that are led with a concept of workplace fulfillment. No one needs to be rescued from the hard work they do. And actually, the hard work they do is very fulfilling as long as the school is set up with a clear purpose and staff are valued and supported to do the work that they do. And I think if we start to think about it like that, then we start to really be clear about well-being. And this whole concept that actually happiness is fleeting. If we chase it constantly, then there's a real problem with that. So, obviously, if you think about it in depth, you can see that eating a piece of chocolate cake for every meal, while it might make you happy in the moment, isn't a way to constant happiness. The more we try and chase it, the more we slip through our fingers. I don't know how many of you have run a marathon or done something similar. I was talking to someone on the couch to 5K the other day and talking about, at 4.5 kilometers of your 5K run or mile 19 of your marathon, no one is describing themselves as happy. Yet they're still doing that real purposeful work, worthwhile challenges. Happiness as a life goal is a terrible idea, especially in work. And this is where we get well-being wrong sometimes in school. So chasing feel-good perks like handing out cupcakes or biscuits or free tea and coffee, you can't yoga your way out of a well-being crisis in your school. So if we make happiness our aim, we're setting ourselves up for failure. So just to come to that idea, and I quite like this quote, and I'd like to think I came up with it, but I probably think I've stolen it from somewhere. But in the fullness of time, I've forgotten if I have stolen it from someone. But I want to bust the myth about happiness and the sense of pleasure or positive emotion is sufficient or a sensible goal for us. As leaders and influencers in the education sector, our job is not to eliminate every discomfort or to plaster smiles on the faces of staff with superficial well-being initiatives. And there's hundreds of them in schools. And I'm not saying they're not worthwhile, and I'll come to that in a moment. But actually, our role is to cultivate something more sustainable, a culture of support, purpose and a chance for the workplace to link into feelings of purpose and fulfillment. Now, this is something I like to call purposeful work. And purposeful effort for me is it recognizes that, you know, we invest in lots of areas in our lives. Work is only one area, right? And I'm going to divide this up, and I'll show you sort of what I call the well-being machine in a moment. Now, for us as leaders, we don't have influence over people's health. We don't have influence over people's personal relationships. But we understand that these things exist. But we do have influence over the work environment. So the difference means that we need to be clear about ensuring there is a purpose for the work that staff do and that they are flourishing in the work they do because of the support they get from us. So this is what I call sort of the 5 life domains. So if it's not happiness we're after, well, what should we be trying to do and understanding as leaders? Now, I don't want to get bogged down in the philosophy of happiness and chasing flourishing, but there's a philosopher called Charles Taylor which calls it lower flourishing. And I'm not, once again, the higher flourishing is the spiritual and the religious, but the lower flourishing he defines as thriving in the everyday aspects of our life. And I like that as a concept. And as leaders, this is what I want us to start thinking about, finding meaning and purpose in the ordinary and everyday work of our work and our relationships. In our daily interactions in the staff room, the satisfaction of helping a student understand a concept, the camaraderie around colleagues, understanding that flourishing is not lower in the sense of value, but it's leading a fulfilling life. It's about having good friends, happy family, fulfilling work, and enjoyable leisure time. The very things that influence our well-being overall. Now, I've separated them up into fulfillment in each of those areas, and I'm going to start moving into the area of work in a moment. So you consider the life of a teacher, you know, early mornings, lesson planning, countless conversations with young people. These may not always be happy moments, like running a marathon. You know, they're not happy moments, but they are moments that are challenging and tiring, but you forge your way through them like a marathon. You are determined, you are resilient, and you are finding them meaningful through the work that you do. Where they are not meaningful is where school leaders give, you know, school staff pointless, meaningless, Ofsted-focused tasks that have no purpose in the learning of the young people. So these, if we're running schools properly, we're doing purposeful work that give a sense of contribution and purpose. And these are the things that we need to be doing more of. So this is where I come to the concept of workplace fulfillment. And I think what we need to do in schools is remove the concept of well-being, because well-being becomes weaponized. Weaponized in the sense that, you know, leaders are trying to do something, staff want something for themselves, and no one's quite clear the language that we need to be using. I think if we look at this as a two-pronged approach, moving from well-being to workplace fulfillment, it occurs in schools when staff align with their school's vision, they apply purposeful, meaningful effort, and experience a sense of purpose as a result. It also, so this is what's required from the staff member. So this is a shared responsibility of workplace fulfillment. It also requires school leaders create a supportive environment where expectations are clear, staff feel valued, recognized, and have opportunities to grow. So if we're doing those things, well-being then becomes a broader, holistic concept of a life going well. It encompasses, you know, life and satisfaction, meaningful relationships, a sense of community, financial stability, and liking what you do every day. And I think sometimes we don't have that in schools anymore. And certainly in the way some schools are run, you know, and I know that a lot of academy chains get you know, it's not just academy chains, although they seem to make a bit of a process of it. So when you come to workplace fulfillment, it's specific, it's understandable, it's crucial for leaders to understand, and they need to communicate this clearly to the staff to build that deep sense of purpose, contribution, and growth. So in short, workplace fulfillment means a meaningful effort, a shared vision, a culture of support, and opportunities for staff members to grow. And if they're doing that work, children are also benefiting, right? It's not just a moral case, it's a business case. In schools that are run well with workplace fulfillment, young people do well, and research shows that. And then what just interestingly is an aside, I'm collecting evidence for research I'm doing at the moment. And what I found to be fascinating is well-being, and you saw the education support report on teacher well-being index published this week. Well-being is at crisis levels. I've interviewed, well, I've surveyed around about 50 head teachers. Not one of them has well-being as a key point on their school development plan, which I think is fascinating. I'm trying to dig a bit deeper into why well-being is such a crucial issue in schools, but no one thinks it's crucial enough to put it on their school development plan. I have some ideas around that, and I'd probably be worth talking about later on. But here are some of the headline remarks by Sinead McBrarity's report on teacher wellbeing. And she says, you know, the people who educate our children are operating under intolerable pressure. I mean, that's just a damning indictment of what we're doing in schools, both at a system level, as Antoinette was talking about before. There are some places that are trying to really sort this out, but also at a head teacher operational level, making sure that we're doing things that support well-being in a way that supports our young people. So there's really a two-pronged approach at policy and system level, which we've heard Antoinette talk about, but I'll focus more in on just what, you know, in the last few minutes of my talk here is about how we actually intentionally design a healthy work environment for our staff and for our pupils. The payoff then becomes healthier, more fulfilled teachers, improved teaching and learning, and thriving teachers mean thriving young people. So, and interestingly, the Education Support Report published last week referred to Deneve and Ward's work on well-being. I'll refer to that because I quite like this. I like this concept, and I think this is how we need to start defining well-being. Sorry, I've gone the wrong way. When we start to talk about well-being in schools, there are the biscuits in the staff room, there's the yoga days or free gym memberships. There's these sort of direct approaches where you're trying to impact on people's well-being in a direct way. But what we know about happiness is that's motivation is helpful, but it's temporary. So they're visible, they enhance motivation, but they're short-term bursts, right? What McBrarity and what Deneve and Ward talk about is actually the intentional redesign of the workplace to ensure that indirect approaches impact on decision making, leadership consistency, and they create. And the word discipline is difficult because sometimes it's about command and control. This isn't about command and control. This is around disciplined collective alignment of staff. The concept of clarity is kindness. The clearer you are as a leader about some of the more challenging things you have to do, staff align and fall in behind that. So it's about the purpose, it's about your vision statement, it's about making that a living thing in your school, not just a statement that's stuck on a wall or lives in a desk drawer. And this whole concept also that structure liberates, you know, where you are able to have a really clear structure of behavior systems, teaching and learning that everybody gets in behind, it liberates school staff to do things really clearly without having to worry about behavior, how behavior is managed, planning, organization. So there's this really interesting mix of, yes, do the motivational stuff, but as I said, you can't yoga your way out of a well-being crisis. What you can do is intentionally design a culture in your organization which enables people to be valued and supported. So the indirect but impactful, I think, are the things that I'd like to sort of start to round off with what leaders need to be doing in school. Be really clear about your core values and purpose. Make sure your mission is the bedrock of the daily work of everybody in your school. There's a collective purpose, and the core purpose leads to core activities that staff understand and deliver, knowing that it's hard work, but appreciating the meaningfulness of running that marathon with the children alongside them. Consistency and this concept of clarity is kindness. You know, we've all worked in environments where the leader, you know, you don't know whether you say good morning to the leader when they're happy or sad, or what if you're going to be picked up or held accountable for things that are inconsistent. Real clarity, real structure around the way that it's organized. The concept of human connection, you know, design a school culture that's deeply inclusive. Every member of staff, from the youngest teacher to the veteran teacher, they should feel. And it was interesting that and Antoinette was talking about belonging. The new Ofsted framework, for all its faults, talks about belonging, flourishing, thriving young people. We need to start this with our staff as well, that ability for human connection. The problem often with schools is they are timetable driven. Teachers don't spend a lot of time with each other. They spend a lot of time with the pupils, but real human connection, finding opportunities to be flexible enough to let teachers talk, plan, organize themselves in a way that doesn't mean that they don't even see each other in the lunchtime or having a coffee at the break times. Opportunities for growth, you know, the sign of an excellent head teacher is that there are staff progressing, moving on, developing for themselves. The other thing about schools is autonomy and flexibility is really difficult. We're directed by a curriculum, we're directed by trust systems, we're directed by local authority systems or diocesan systems. But we need to find spaces in which teachers can have their own autonomy within that structure I've spoken about and opportunities for flexibility. So when I talk about that well-being machine, here's what there is a concept that life should be constantly easy. Well, that's just ridiculous, right? In all areas, whether if I said to my wife, I'd like you just to make my life easy for the rest of my life, our relationship's having a few difficulties, but it's for you to sort out, my relationship will be even shorter, right? So that what we need to understand is that in every area of our life, there will be effort, compromise, and sacrifice. The outcomes of that are sometimes feeling energized, happy. Other times you'll feel frustrated, annoyed, tired, exhausted. But actually, if the machine is working, there will also be fulfillment, satisfaction, and accomplishment. And that's what we need to be working towards. Just flick through these. So as we start to think about what the system looks like, it's not about well-being in that sense of it's someone else's responsibility. I need to be happy all the time. My work needs to be easy. It's about making sure there's that real clarity about working in a school where there is a clearly defined view of workplace fulfillment. We measure our success not just by test scores or inspection results, but by the health and engagement and mental health and physical health and more broader outcomes than that. We create environments where teachers can find meaning in their daily work. So when we're leading staff, we lead with integrity and intentionality. We champion an understanding that the goal is not a phony, shallow happiness goal, but a fulfilling, rich, engaging environment. So what I'd finish with is saying, just imagine schools where every teacher feels that their work is purposeful. It's connected to a vision of clarity. There's other people around them who are also motivated by that. If we get to that, then I think we overcome this concept of well-being and happiness. And I said to you at the start, some of the stuff that you think you know about it is probably going to wrong. I'm just going to leave a final slide up in a moment, which is some of the myths around well-being, which is just something to think about. But let's make our schools true places of flourishing. We have to reshape the narrative around well-being, and I think that's going to be a hard work because I think there's a lot of sort of challenges around that, and leaders and teaching staff and support staff are feeling that actually they're not on the same page. We need to do that work. But if we do that work, then well-being and fulfillment will follow on.
Okay. Can you wind up, please, James?
That's it.
No,
I'm
you are.
done.
Thank you.
And those are just the zombie myths. They're zombie myths because the more we try and knock them down, the more that they keep going. So that's the end of me, John.
Okay. Thank you. I'm just reading your myths. Okay. Thank you.
You're more than welcome. And as I said, I'm happy to talk about this in more detail, but I'll be publishing some work on this very soon. So I'll send it your way when I've finished.
Thank you. Okay, I need to. Could you stop the share then?
I'll stop sharing.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Right. Thank you, both our speakers, for stimulating, invigorating, and quite different contributions. What we'll do now is just open that to the floor, and then we'll come back for comments and questions. We've got about 20 minutes, and then I'll come back to the speakers for final thoughts. So, anybody? I've got Carl.
Thanks for that, James and Antoinette. I'm very discontented at the moment. I'm under stress. And there's something I'm working on when the deadline is actually tomorrow. It's got to be in. But I know when I get it done, I'll be so pleased with myself that happy even. But it's how we respond to situations which we sometimes put ourselves into, which make us struggle, but that it's not beyond us. And actually getting to the outcomes that we want is a delight, and it wouldn't be enjoyable if it weren't so hard to get there. You've got a difficult class, I'm thinking, in the school, but you get on top of it, and they do like you, not just because you're nice to them, but the relationship grows in half a term in a primary school I'm thinking of, and they're yours. And that can bring a very nice professional glow. And I just thank Antoinette and James. Those two talks did dovetail beautifully, provocatively, with lasting things to reflect on. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Tom.
I've got a couple of questions, one for each of the speakers, actually. So, Antoinette, you talk about sort of bonding with your school. There was some work in the States 80s and 90s called the Social Emotional Learning Program, the CEL programs, that talked very strongly about bonding with schools. And that led to the SEAL strategies from the national strategies from the last Labour government. I just wondered if you've looked at that work and whether you found any of that useful, the old SEAL national strategy papers.
Okay. Thank you. We'll come back to the speakers in a little while. Thanks, Tom. Louise.
Hi, good morning. Thank you both speakers. My question is about a tension or a clash between values and educational purposes, and it could be for either of the speakers. Because on the one hand, we do have a state's education system that is incentivized to seek academic results and even economically incentivized because of funding requirements to seek good performance in league tables and the like. So I find it difficult to imagine a school that could center these holistic values of well-being and of flourishing, and at the same time exist in a programmatic system that demands academic outcome both of pupils and of teachers. So I was just wondering how that tension could be either met or attenuated in the kind of visions that both of you set out for us. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Louise. Melian. Melian?
Very similar question to Louise. The kind of ethos that both of you have identified, which are important to ensure that well-being is central to any school, is countered, if you like, by the current system in which we live, both in terms of requirements, top-heavy demands, and the whole accountability system. So how do we marry up these two to ensure that every person, every child, every teacher in any school is enabled to provide their well-being, or it's not provided, but agenda the well-being both of you have been talking about, because I think the tension is huge.
Okay, thanks, Melian. Tom, did I cut you off prematurely? You have more to say?
Very important question for James Lane. Cut me off from a prime, John.
Sorry, Tom.
Right. That's So, James, just quick then. I looked at your stats that you put up. I did quite a lot of wellbeing stuff back in the day when wellbeing was, again, another one of the government initiatives. The dates you put up had 45% of staff saying the organisation they work in or the work they're asked to do negatively affects their well-being. When we did lots of surveys when I was teaching some time ago, we did yearly surveys in the schools I was in. What we found is that the number of people who felt that the organisation negatively affected their well-being was high. But when you asked, do you negatively affect the well-being of others, that score was very, very low. And I always found that quite interesting, because everyone, plays their part. I think you've both rightly said, in terms of the well-being of an organisation. So I just wondered if you've come across that, and if you have, how you've managed to sort of square that circle, if there is one to square.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Okay, is anybody else?
I'm trying to catch your eye, Chair.
There we are, Alan. Yes.
Unfortunately, we're in a difficult club. We're in the club of the UK, US, Japan, and South Korea, where there's this obsession with academic performance and talking about getting children into university in the primary school, which is nonsense. But it is possible to kick against the pricks, in fact, to get out of that culture. We did it in the 1980s. In the late 1980s, we had schools that were islands of civilization, that were free of racism and were free of sexism. It is possible. And I was chair of a school for 22 years where we did it. And what we did was, there was leadership from the head and the senior staff that everybody should feel valued and enriched, and that every pupil had to go home at least once a week and say they were praised for something. Academic performance, kindness, curiosity, bringing things in to show and demonstrate. And it is possible to do those things. And what teachers should do is, by body language and the words and the phrases and the metaphors they use, to communicate to pupils that every one of them is valued and appreciated and their efforts are recognised. And that by doing those crucial things, for instance, I worked at the university and I worked near a museum, and I went to the museum regularly, 3-4 times a week, to have a cup of coffee, and I watched children in queues. My school, they were quietly talking in a queue and reaffirming each other. Lots of other schools, they were pushing each other, hitting each other, and that's not acceptable. So it is possible to set your school as an island of appreciation, good feedback, feeling valued, feeling a thing. And the other thing, lastly, is what makes a good childhood. And again, if you take places like the Netherlands and Finland and Sweden and Denmark, what goes on in the home and what goes on in the community is so much more supportive than it is here. So you marry a school, on the way I've just talked about it, where everybody's praised and valued, and you marry that into a much better community and family relationship.
Thank you, Alan. Mike, did you want to come in? No, you. Okay, thank you. Right. All right, okay. We'll go back to the speaks in a moment. I just wanted to add one more thing to what Alan was saying. It reminded me, when you were talking about kids pushing in queues or queuing nicely, it reminded me of some of the behaviour policies we've heard of, particularly in academies. And the one that sprung to mind was Mossbourne, which I imagine, Antoinette, you know quite well. And the idea of kids walking a metre apart, hands by their sides in complete silence down corridors. And those behaviour policies strike me as being rather inhumane, in the sense that they don't recognise the children's humanity, the need to interact and to talk and so on. One of the things I think James mentioned was that kind of human connection. And just to chip that in as well, is that, behaviour policies can if we follow what James was saying, can lead to purposeful learning, but they can also seem to be remove some of the human purpose in the sense of connection interaction. So what we'll do now, if we may, is go back to Antoinette and James and just ask for some final thoughts, really, some responses to what we've heard, but also some final thoughts from you. Antoinette, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll pick up. Hopefully, I've got all the names and the points. Tom, you talked about SEAL. Back when I was in school, I was very much intrinsic around the work with SEAL and implemented it within the school curriculum, taught in a one form entry school. And as a school leader, it was very much straightforward, I would say, to implement SEALs, the principles and the goals around that. At a local authority level now, we haven't looked at SEAL so much, but some of those principles are definitely underlying in the work that we're doing now within our wellbeing work within schools. Carl, you talked about the stressful environment. I think you're absolutely right. I think we have a way in British society. I mean, Britain is a great country. I mean, I love the country that I am born in and feel deeply proud of it. But there are things that deeply, deeply concern me about how we do things. And normalising stress is one of them. We normalise stress as if it's something that we're meant to live with. And actually, stress is there to tell you, your mind and your body, actually, something's not quite right. And you need to address what's going on to alleviate that stress, rather than finding ways to cope with constant stress. And the school environment is a good example of that. And we've got to align the school day, the practice, the curriculum, all the expectations in a manageable way. And look, as a newly qualified teacher, I was observed by Ofsted and I was rated outstanding. And I don't want to sound arrogant. Going from when I started the school, it's inquired improvements. To go from inquired improvements to outstanding wasn't an issue of me, because I really believe we know what good looks like. The issue for me was maintaining that standard. And I learned very early on as a newly qualified teacher that perfection doesn't exist, but every day you just try to be a good teacher and do the best by your class. So we need to find a way, Carl, to denormalize stress in our environment. I think, is it Milan? You talked about schools being sensitized to do the right thing around belonging. I think that's the work that we're doing around belonging in our schools, the work we're doing around well-being in our school hubs within the school environment. As a council, as a local authority, we're saying let's take a trauma-informed approach to our children around behaviour and well-being. And one of the things that I think someone said, well, how does it work at a school level? Many of our schools in Hackney have a nurture group approach. So when I was leaving school, I was a Senko, and I started the training that Senkos had to do. And one of the things I was training on was the nurture group training. Many of our schools have a nurture group hub. So you go into a school, they've got a table, a chair, a sitting room, washing machine, and it's really setting that home environment, because sometimes not every child comes from an environment where they sit around a table. If you are in temporary accommodation, there is no room for a dining table and chairs. So we can't make the assumption that every child comes into the school environment ready to learn, because those nurturing skills and ability that they need in the classroom are ready for them. So a lot of our schools, our primary schools, have that nurture group environment and take that approach. And I think that has really, really, you're right, Carl, it does align with the presentation. That has really, really helped. Also, if you remember, I don't know when you were growing up, when I was growing up, my parents talked about a day where they left the back door open. Now you'd be horrified to do that, but that's a conversation for another time. But love that mum and dad in Britain could leave the front door and the back door open. But on Sundays, we would eat together around a table and we would talk. So that was normalized in my home. That is not normalized in every home. So we have to make sure that the school environment normalizes the things that we want and know children need and is part of the school day. So it's not an add-on that adds pressure. So we do that through the nurture group. And that's Louise, you picked up on that. And that's how we do it in every school. Most of our primary schools have that nurture group. Alan, yes, we can talk about Japan. You were saying that academic push. I think what we try to do in Hackney, we try to talk about apprenticeships just as much as we talk about universities. They are both on equal par. We also talk about manual jobs like being a plumber, electrician. You know, people talk about university. You could go to university, get a degree, and still not find a job. Everyone's going to need a mechanic. Everyone's going to need a plumber. And it's how we promote those other skills for our children and young people. And that's what we're trying to do, to give it equity at a local level, because there's too much emphasis on university. I went to university, yes. You know, that's how I became a qualified teacher. I did a teaching degree. But I'm also now a very senior politician within local government with no formal training at all. So there are ways to excel in life without going to university. And what we try to do is normalise. So we do apprenticeships. One thing that we do with local businesses, and I will round up, Chair, here, after making one more point, as politicians say, I'm going to end and they keep talking. We team up with our local businesses to do apprenticeships and work experience with our children and young people. And I think last year we got 100 places. So that's just an example of practically we're saying to our community, our business community, we've got a workforce, can you tap into it? And we make sure that every looked after children, if they apply for a job in the council, they're guaranteed an interview. They don't necessarily have an interview, but they're guaranteed. Again, those are just things to alleviate that stress, that tension. And again, it's positive wellbeing. The last thing I'll touch on is, John, you talked about behaviour. Our scrutiny is looking at behavioural policies in our schools as we speak. So it's a live piece of work that we're looking at in Hackney. And I talked about our HEALS approach, because we're saying to every school, whether you are an academy, a maintained, a faith school, we want you to take a trauma-informed approach to any discipline within your school. And actually, if you take that approach, behaviour will be different, but also children's response can be different. If children are afraid, if they are worried and they are anxious, sometimes they act out in what we say inappropriate behaviour, but most time that's based on fear. Now, we all know little young people that they're just going to do the wrong thing and they choose to. We all know one of those. And that does happen. Children just decide they're going to be defiant. But the majority of times in a school context, when children misbehave, they are trying to tell us something, and they haven't got the emotional intelligence to be able to respond in a way that society says is improvement. The last thing that I do say is that I remind children and educators, anger is a good emotion. It's how you respond when you're angry is what you need to help children work through. But telling children to be angry is wrong. Anger is a good emotion. It's telling you disapprove. And we just need to help children to manage that. Okay, I'll pause there, Chair, because we want to hear from Dr. Lane. Thank you.
Thank you, Antoinette. James.
Yeah, thanks, Antoinette. And to dovetail into some of that work, I'll pick up on sort of school level, and coming to Tom's point first. It's a really interesting point you make, Tom, because sometimes the school staff will see leadership as a problem, but sometimes they see their colleagues as a problem as well. And what we do in our schools is we do contracting at the start of every year. So our contracting, so me as a leader, and it's a bit difficult sometimes because you get a bit of a kicking when you get up in front of a group of 100 staff and you ask them what they think about the way the school's led. And they tell you honestly, and hopefully they do tell you honestly, and we try and have systems and processes where they can share what they think. You do get a bit of a kicking sometimes, and that's absolutely right. Now, not a lot of leaders are brave enough to do that sort of work. And I do lots of leadership training where I encourage people to maybe start small with a department or a phase or a key stage and the staff and that, and find out what the staff want. But when we do our contracting, we talk first about, are we clear about our purpose? Are we all signed up to this? And I'm really clear. If you're not signed up to this purpose, one of the schools is in Tottenham. We serve a really particular, diverse, challenging community, often young people from chaotic and backgrounds of deprivation. this is the work we're going to do. And as Antoinette said, some young people are coming to us with some real challenges in their lives, which means they can be challenging in the classroom. If you're not set up for that purpose, you're in the wrong place. The second thing we talk about is what are the behaviors? If this is our purpose, then what are the behaviors that we show collectively we're all signed up to and are held to account on? And we're really clear about that. And the last thing, and this is where it gets interesting, comes to your point directly, Tom. What are the behaviors you see in our organisation, in our schools, where staff sabotage our purpose and don't follow our behaviors? And what becomes really interesting here is staff often say leaders aren't dealing with these things, but sometimes we don't know people are showing up late to their duties, or people aren't doing the things they're supposed to be doing, or not fulfilling the roles. And these sessions become really interesting for staff when and sometimes like you can see staff shrinking into their chair because the behaviours being described by their colleagues are their behaviours. And so we talk about these sabotage behaviours, we outline them, we're really clear on them, and we say, right, if these are the behaviours you feel sabotage our organisation, these are the behaviours we're really going to stamp on. And then we will really, within confidentiality and procedures, we try to be really clear that we're dealing with the things that people said about their colleagues. So, without trying to create divisions between staff, actually, we've got to outline those behaviours because sometimes leaders get a kicking for stuff that they don't know about. So, first of all, be brave as a leader, ask for that feedback, and then be seen to be acting on that feedback. And this concept of sabotage, we've been doing this for probably about the last 5 years. It's really helped us build a culture of well-being in our school where staff can talk about what the issues are, and they can see that we're taking it seriously and dealing with it. Coming to Louise and Melian, and this is at the core of leading schools, right? And your tension, you talk about that tension between getting results and making a difference to young people, right? And in the leadership training I do, the starting point is really important for me. For you, and what I call it is, the training I do, I call it a cultural, what's your cultural anchor? If you're setting up a school culture, what's anchoring you to then behaviors that you display as a leader, right? So if your cultural anchor is, this is an exam factory, the only thing we care about are results, we're going to churn out young people, get good test results. The behaviors you then see from the school, exclusions, suspensions, very little care for those more vulnerable learners. If your starting point is, we are going to make a difference to the young people, results will be a really key part of that. But actually, we also value flourishing. Now, getting this right, and for me, and I've always been clear about this in my leadership, the idea about getting results and ensuring pupil flourishing, they're not mutually exclusive. Some schools do see them as mutually exclusive. I know I've made a career out of going into schools that have had troubled backgrounds, and sometimes you go into school and say, well, we can't do that with these children in Tottenham because, their background means that we can't do that. Absolute rubbish. These children are just as capable as children anywhere else of getting the results. We've just got to do it a bit differently. So I think for me, that tension, and it's coming back to leadership courage, it's about the execution of leadership. You can do both, but maybe let's not be so caught up about being an outstanding school, because if you want to do that, and I call this sort of identity slippage, your cultural anchor there starts to shift away from, a culture of flourishing and well-being and making a difference to young people towards, I'd love to get an outstanding judgment. Maybe if I just got rid of these kids or did these things or changed our behavior policy in this way, I wouldn't have so much trouble from that difficult group of kids. You've got to be brave. You've got to be focused on your cultural anchor. You've got to make sure that you're getting results and you're making a difference. So I've never felt, well, for me, and I know I do lots of training and I try to get people starting from the right starting point. And there will always be that tension. High stakes accountability in our system is a nightmare, right? If you are not anchored culturally to your leadership, then you slip towards you are drawn towards these sort of behaviors and outcomes that are not good for large numbers of our young people in our schools. So balancing that, I think, is really important.
Okay.
And those are my two key takeaways. And I think Antoinette sort of picked up on some of the other points, which, I know we're running out of time, so I don't want to
Okay.
keep going. But I could talk all day if you give me more time.
Well, another time, James, I'm sure you're going to be welcome back.
Thank
And
you.
you, Antoinette, as well. I mean, two very thoughtful, stimulating discussions,
Yeah.
but also with that pragmatic, practical, not just thinking, we can do this as well. So thank you both very much for that.